our senior minister, Reverend Peggy, said a few weeks ago, "Welcome to the Community Church of New York. It might look like we are in the Church of the Incarnation, but we are not. We're at Community Church." We carry the legacy of this community with us wherever we gather. Wherever we gather, we bring the spirits of those who came before us, those who built a church rooted in justice, equity, and the radical belief that our faith calls us to change the world.
That's right.
This congregation has lived many lives over its 200-year history. It began as a Unitarian church in a different time, a different New York City, a different world. It was John Haynes Holmes who transformed it into a community church, one that would not simply serve its own members, but would be a force for justice in New York City and beyond. Under his leadership and in the decades that followed, this church became a home for activists, artists, and revolutionaries, a place where faith was lived out in action. Holmes envisioned a church where belief in God or heaven was not a requirement for belonging, where people of all races and nationalities could be together in community, reflecting the diversity and dynamism of New York itself. And Holmes wasn't just a minister, he was a movement builder. In 1909, W.E.B. Du Bois invited him to join the founding team of the NAACP, recognizing that this pulpit was already a platform for racial justice. And a year later, in 1910, Horace Dudley became the first Black congregant to join Community Church at a time when many religious institutions were still segregated. This was not just a symbolic shift. It was a statement about the kind of spiritual home this church aspired to be. And that commitment extended beyond our own congregation. When Egbert Ethelred Brown, one of the first Black Unitarian ministers, founded a Unitarian church in Harlem in 1920, Holmes and his wife, along with Assistant Minister Donald Harrington and his wife, became members and supporters of his congregation. It was a recognition that justice in faith communities could not be passive, that solidarity required more than acknowledgement. It required action. By 1965, Community Church was active in the civil rights movement, sending now Senior Minister Donald Harrington and Minister of Religious Education Dick Leonard to Alabama to support the struggle in Selma. And this wasn't just a moment of solidarity. It was a reflection of this church's long-standing commitment to racial justice, a commitment that required presence, action, and risk. Now, the 60s were a turning point in Unitarian Universalism. Our denomination had long affirmed justice and equity in words, but the civil rights movement demanded more than statements of principle. It demanded a choice. Would Unitarian Universalists truly invest in the struggle for Black liberation? Would our congregations live up to the values we proclaimed? The call for racial justice challenged the comfort of many white Unitarian Universalists. And when Black leaders within the denomination called for real structural change, including financial support and commitments to Black-led UU organizations, denominational support wavered. The Black empowerment controversy of the late 1960s and 70s exposed the limits of Unitarian Universalist commitment, as funding promises were withdrawn and Black UUs were left questioning whether this faith could truly be a home for them. Our denomination lost nearly half of its Black membership in just a few years. And Community Church itself was at the center of that struggle, with members on both sides trying their best to see a new way forward for Unitarian Universalism. It was a devastating moment, one that revealed how Unitarian Universalism often struggles to match its lofty ideals with real equity and inclusion. And this history reminds us that the work of racial justice, both within Unitarian Universalism and in our world at large, has always been a struggle. But it is a struggle worth engaging with. Because, my friends, if we truly believe in a global community, the Church Universal, then our work must begin at home. And that work has begun. In 1997, DRUUMM, Diverse and Revolutionary UU Multicultural Ministries, was founded as a spiritual home for Unitarian Universalists of color, a place to gather, to heal, to lead. It was and still is a radical act of self-determination, a declaration that Unitarian Universalism must be a faith where all are not just welcomed, but empowered. It emerged out of conversations with Black and Latine religious professionals who wanted to build a community for all religious professionals of color to be together. And soon after, the membership was expanded to include all BIPOC UUs. When my family joined the UU Fellowship of Corvallis, Oregon in the early 2000s, we were completely unaware of the newly formed DRUUMM. My mother, sister, and I remained some of the only people of color in our congregation for the next decade, not knowing that there were other UUs of color like us who were craving a community and support that we didn't always find in our own congregations. When I began to get involved with UU youth leadership in high school, I was introduced to DRUUMM, and I excitedly told my mother and sister that there was more to Unitarian Universalism than what we had experienced in our predominantly white congregation. In 2018, at the Pacific Western Regional Assembly, my family had our first experience of what it was like to be in a room of other people who looked like us and shared our values. It was an incredibly powerful experience to share stories of microaggressions and misunderstandings in the context of our shared faith, as well as connect over possibilities of what might be in the future. DRUUMM and the connections that my family and I have made with other UUs of color across the country, that's what feeds my spirit and gives me strength. And so that's why last year I joined DRUUMM's steering committee. I wanted to give back some of the meaning and belonging that had been gifted to my family at a time when I was just beginning to explore my own call to ministry. I joined as one of DRUUMM's outreach coordinators, tasked with finding and connecting to UUs of color in our congregations, just like my mother and my sister, who had never heard of DRUUMM, but were yearning for a community of other BIPOC UUs. And as part of my role, I co-host open houses on Zoom every few months, where members and friends, anyone interested, can drop in to learn more about DRUUMM. And at one of the open houses we held in the fall, I was asked this question by the Reverend Karen Hutt. What does it mean to be revolutionary? Now, as soon as I heard the question, I knew it was one I wanted to explore more. I sat with it, turned it over in my mind. What does it mean to be revolutionary? Not just in history, not just in theory, but in our lives, in our congregations, in our faith. Revolutions are often thought of as grand, dramatic upheavals, marches in the streets, speeches that shake the world, movements that change the course of history. And yes, those moments matter. And we have certainly been a part of them and certainly will continue to be. But revolutions also happen in quieter ways. They happen when someone dares to speak an uncomfortable truth in a space where it has long been silenced. They happen when communities choose to move beyond diversity as a concept and into the deeper work of equity, accountability, and transformation. They happen when people of color in Unitarian Universalism insist that we too belong here, not just as guests, not just as add-ons, but as vital voices shaping the future of our faith. Now, Community Church does have a unique history as one of the more racially diverse congregations in Unitarian Universalism. But being a diverse congregation is not just about being welcoming. It's about being accountable. It's about doing this deep spiritual work of examining who feels at home here and who doesn't. Whose traditions and perspectives shape our worship and our leadership? Where do we still struggle? We live in a world that is increasingly global, increasingly connected. Our values ask us to do the work to build beloved community. But what does that mean when we struggle to even build a just community within our own walls? As long as Unitarian Universalism remains a majority white denomination, we have to wrestle with the reality that people of color often experience our congregations differently. Yes, even here at Community Church. Many BIPOC UUs have felt unseen or unheard in UU spaces. Some have been expected to educate white UUs on racism rather than being embraced as full and equal participants. And others have found that when they speak up about racism, they are met with resistance and not welcomed. And yet, people of color remain in this faith. We remain here because we believe in its promise, because we see something worth fighting for. And that is revolutionary. So what's next? If we are to be both diverse and revolutionary, then we must be willing to change. Revolutions are not comfortable. They shake things up. They ask us to let go of old ways and embrace something new. If we are to be both diverse and revolutionary, then we must be willing to change. And change, real, transformative change, is rarely comfortable. Revolutions aren't just about tearing things down. They're about building something new. They are about reimagining what is possible and committing to the long and messy work of making it real. And for us, this is not even an abstract idea. We're literally in the process of finding a new physical home, a new building that will better reflect who we are and what we aspire to be. It's a literal act of revolution, creating a space where our values can be lived out more fully, where we can gather in new and powerful ways to continue the work of justice and love. It means embracing a love that is not just about kindness, not just about welcome, but about commitment. Revolutionary love is not passive. It is active, bold, and unafraid to take risks. It's the kind of love that calls us to move beyond words into action, beyond good intentions into real transformation. It's one thing to say we're allies in the work of justice, and it's another to show up consistently, unflinchingly, in moments of ease and in moments of tension. It is another to stay in the work when it is uncomfortable, to sit with hard truths without turning away. It is another to choose solidarity, not just in times of crisis, but in the everyday moments where decisions are made about who is heard, who is valued, who is lifted up. Love, true revolutionary love, demands more from us. And this is the work DRUUMM has been doing for decades. Creating spaces of belonging, yes, but also pushing Unitarian Universalism to live up to its own values. To not just be a faith of aspiration, but a faith of action. DRUUMM exists because for too long Unitarian Universalism has struggled to fully live into its promise. But the goal is not just for BIPOC UUs to find belonging in separate spaces. The goal is transformation. The goal is a Unitarian Universalism that no longer marginalizes, no longer silences, no longer relegates people of color to the edges of its vision. And what would it mean for community church to be a model of that transformation? I believe we are already well on our way there, but we still have much further to go. Because transformation is not just about welcoming new voices, it's about being changed by them. It's about a faith that is alive, that is willing to be reshaped by truths that emerge from the margins. And justice is not something we achieve once and for all, it is something we practice, something we recommit to every single day. Our shared values remind us that justice and transformation are inseparable. Justice calls us not only to recognize inequality, but to do the hard work of repairing, redistributing, and reimagining. It demands that we do more than invite people in. It calls us to change the structures that have kept people out. And transformation is what happens when we take that call seriously. It's the willingness to be shaped by what we learn, to let go of what no longer serves liberation, and to embrace a faith that is growing, stretching, and becoming something new. To be revolutionary is to be transformed. It's to understand that our faith cannot remain static. That a Unitarian Universalism that always embodies justice must always be evolving. It must be willing to shift, to be accountable, to listen deeply and act boldly. So the question is, are we willing to be changed? Are we willing not just to say we believe in justice, but to let that belief transform who we are and how we live? Because true justice, true transformation is not just about others. It's about all of us. It's about the kind of faith that we want to build, the kind of community that we want to become. And that brings us right back to this moment, right here, right now. Beloveds, we are standing at a threshold. The work of justice is calling us forward. The work of transformation is asking something of us. The work of building a diverse and revolutionary faith is not something we can wait for. It is something we create together with every choice that we make. So I ask you, community church, and I ask all of you who are joining us in person and online, from whatever your daily context might be, how will you commit to this work? Not just today, but every day. How will you continue to lead, not just in words, but in action? How will you, in your own life, embody the call to build a faith and a world where equity, justice, and interdependence are not just ideals, but lived realities? This is the work of our faith. This is the work of our lives. May we do it with courage. May we do it with love. May we do it together. May it be so.